Subscribe to the channel for more stories. My name is Sarah, I'm 28 years old, and I need to tell you about the night that changed everything. What I'm about to reveal, I've never told anyone before, not even my closest friends. It's a story about humiliation, revenge, and a secret so shocking that it still makes my hands shake when I think about it. I was working as a waitress at an upscale restaurant in Manhattan. You know the type: crystal chandeliers, gold-plated everything, and customers who spend more on a single meal than I made in a month. I had been struggling to make ends meet for years, working double shifts just to pay rent for my tiny studio apartment. My uniform was old and faded, my shoes had holes that I covered with duct tape, and my coat was something I'd found at a thrift store 3 winters ago. That Friday night started like any other. I was rushing between tables, carrying heavy trays, trying to smile despite the exhaustion that had become my constant companion. The restaurant was packed with the usual crowd: Wall Street executives, celebrities, politicians, all flaunting their wealth like peacocks showing their feathers. I had learned to become invisible to them, just another piece of furniture they barely acknowledged. But then he walked in. Marcus Blackstone. I recognized him immediately from magazines and news articles. One of the youngest billionaires in America, heir to a tech empire, with piercing blue eyes and the kind of arrogance that money can buy. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my annual salary, and he carried himself like he owned the world, which, in many ways, he did. The hostess seated him at table 12, right in my section. My heart started racing, not from attraction, but from pure terror. Rich customers like him were either completely indifferent or absolutely terrible to deal with. There was rarely an in-between. I took a deep breath, straightened my faded uniform, and approached his table with my best professional smile. But what happened next changed everything. The moment he looked up at me, his expression shifted from mild interest to something I can only describe as disgust. His eyes traveled from my worn-out shoes to my fraying collar, and then he did something that still haunts me to this day. He laughed, not a polite chuckle, but a loud, mocking laugh that made every head in the restaurant turn toward us. "Excuse me," he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "but did this establishment start hiring homeless people? Because that's what this looks like to me." The words hit me like physical blows. I felt my cheeks burning with shame as conversations around us stopped and all eyes focused on the spectacle he was creating. But I still didn't know what was coming next. The humiliation was crushing, but I forced myself to maintain composure. Years of serving entitled customers had taught me to swallow my pride, no matter how bitter it tasted. "Good evening, sir," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Can I start you with something to drink?" But Marcus wasn't done with his performance. He leaned back in his chair, that cruel smile never leaving his face, and continued his assault. "Look at this place," he announced to his dining companions who had just arrived. "They're really letting their standards slip if they're hiring people who look like they just crawled out of a dumpster." His friends joined in the laughter, and I felt something inside me break, not just my pride but something deeper. The part of me that had always believed that hard work and dignity mattered more than appearances. I was a human being, working honestly to support myself, and he was treating me like garbage for entertainment. "I'm sorry if my appearance bothers you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Perhaps you'd prefer a different server." I was giving him an out, hoping to escape this nightmare, but Marcus had other plans. "Oh no," he said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "I want you to serve me. I find it amusing. Tell me, do they not pay you enough here to buy decent clothes? Or is this just what poor people consider fashionable?" The table erupted in laughter again, and I noticed other diners pulling out their phones, probably recording this humiliation for their social media. What Marcus didn't know was that I had been recording our interaction too, not intentionally at first. My phone was in my apron pocket, and I had accidentally activated the voice recorder earlier when I was fumbling for my notepad. But now, as I listened to his cruel words being captured, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Power. I served his table that night with mechanical precision, enduring every snide comment, every mocking glance, every cruel joke at my expense. He ordered the most expensive items on the menu, made me recite the ingredients of every dish, and complained about imaginary problems just to watch me squirm. His friends followed his lead, treating me like their personal entertainment, but as the night progressed, something strange happened. I started paying attention to their conversation in a way I never had before. These weren't just random rich people, they were discussing business deals, stock movements, insider information that would be worth millions to the right people. And they were talking about it all in front of me, the poor, pathetic waitress, who was apparently too insignificant to matter. That's when I realized something that would change everything. They didn't see me as human enough to be dangerous. I was invisible to them, just like furniture, and invisible people hear everything. Asterisk. As the evening wore on, Marcus and his companions grew more relaxed, more careless with their words. The expensive wine was flowing freely, and their conversations became increasingly candid. I moved around their table like a ghost, refilling glasses and clearing plates while they discussed their latest business ventures with shocking openness. The FDA approval comes through next Tuesday, one of them was saying, a man I recognized as Richard Thorne, CEO of a major pharmaceutical company. Once it hits the market, Medicor stock will triple overnight. My inside source confirmed it this morning. Marcus nodded knowingly. I've already positioned myself, bought 2 million shares through shell companies. When the announcement hits, I'll make more in one day than most people see in a lifetime. They all laughed at this, completely oblivious to the fact that they had just confessed to insider trading, within earshot of a witness. But that wasn't the worst of it. As I pretended to clean the table next to theirs, I heard them discussing something that made my blood run cold. They were talking about deliberately withholding critical safety information about a new drug that was about to hit the market. People could die, and they didn't care as long as their stock prices remained high. The side effects won't show up for months, Richard was explaining casually, as if he were discussing the weather. By then, we'll have already cashed out and moved on to the next opportunity. Let the lawyers handle the lawsuits later. I felt sick to my stomach, but I kept listening, kept recording. Every word was being captured on my phone, and with each passing minute, I realized I was witnessing something massive. These weren't just cruel rich people, they were criminals, discussing their crimes openly because they believed they were untouchable. Marcus turned to me suddenly, catching me off guard. You're still here, he sneered. Shouldn't you be serving other tables? Or are you too fascinated by conversations you couldn't possibly understand? I'm sorry, sir, I replied meekly, playing my role perfectly. I was just making sure you had everything you needed. What I need, he said, standing up and towering over me, is for you to remember your place. You're here to serve, not to eavesdrop on your betters. He reached into his wallet and pulled out $100 bill, but instead of handing it to me, he dropped it on the floor. There's your tip. You can crawl for it if you want it badly enough. The entire restaurant was watching now. I could feel their eyes on me, some filled with pity, others with cruel amusement. This was my moment of ultimate humiliation, the point where most people would either break down or storm off. But I surprised everyone, including myself. I bent down and picked up the money, not because I was defeated, but because I was calculating. Every second of this humiliation was being recorded. Every cruel word was being captured. Marcus thought he was destroying me, but he was actually giving me exactly what I needed to destroy him. But what I discovered next would shock even me. Asterisk. As I pocketed the $100 bill, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. Marcus's wallet had fallen partially open when he'd pulled out the money, and I could see something that didn't make sense. There, among his credit cards and identification, was a photograph of a young girl who looked exactly like me. Not similar, identical. Same eyes, same hair, same facial structure. It was like looking at a mirror image of myself from 10 years ago. The shock nearly made me drop my tray. Who was this girl? And why did Marcus Blackstone, a man who had just humiliated me in public, have her photograph in his wallet? My mind was racing with possibilities, none of them good. But I couldn't afford to react visibly, not yet. I had to maintain my cover as the defeated waitress while I figured out what this meant. I excused myself to the kitchen, claiming I needed to place their dessert order. Once I was alone, I pulled out my phone and stared at the recording app that had been running all evening. For hours of audio, including their insider trading confessions, their discussions about covering up drug side effects, and Marcus's public humiliation of me. But now I had something else, a mystery that connected me to him in ways I couldn't understand. I tried to focus on the immediate situation. The information I had recorded was explosive: insider trading, securities fraud, conspiracy to conceal life-threatening side effects. These were federal crimes that could land them all in prison for decades. But that photograph haunted me. Why did Marcus have it? Who was that girl who looked exactly like me? When I returned to their table, I watched Marcus more carefully. Now that I knew what to look for, I could see him glancing at me with an expression I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't just cruelty or amusement. There was something else there. Recognition, guilt, fear. I couldn't tell, but it was definitely more complex than simple rich person sadism. The evening was winding down, and Marcus's group was preparing to leave. They had consumed nearly $3,000 worth of food and wine, and the bill sat on the table like a monument to excess. Marcus picked it up, examined it briefly, and then did something that surprised everyone. He pulled out his wallet again, the same wallet with the mysterious photograph, and placed a credit card on the table. But it wasn't his usual Black American Express. It was something I'd never seen before, a completely transparent credit card that seemed to shimmer in the light. "Put everything on this," he told me, his voice suddenly different, less mocking, more nervous. "And make sure you charge it exactly as written. Don't change anything." I took the card carefully, trying not to show my confusion. It was unlike anything I'd ever handled, incredibly thin, almost weightless, with no visible numbers or text, just his name embossed in silver letters, Marcus Blackstone. But as I held it up to the light, I could see something etched very faintly in the transparent material. Numbers, account numbers, and something else that made my breath catch. A name, not Marcus Blackstone. The name etched into this impossible credit card was Sarah Matthews, my name, my exact name, spelled exactly the way it appeared on my driver's license. My hands started shaking as the implications hit me. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't random cruelty. Marcus Blackstone knew exactly who I was, and everything that had happened tonight had been orchestrated for reasons I was only beginning to understand. But the truth was far more terrifying than I could have imagined. I stared at the credit card in my trembling hands, trying to process what I was seeing. My name, etched into Marcus Blackstone's transparent credit card. This couldn't be a coincidence. Nothing about this evening had been coincidence. But before I could fully absorb the implications, Marcus was standing beside me, his hand gripping my wrist with surprising gentleness. "Process the payment," he whispered, his voice completely different from the mocking tone he'd used all evening. "And then, meet me outside. We need to talk." The transformation was so complete that I wondered if I'd been watching an elaborate performance all night. With shaking fingers, I ran the mysterious card through our payment system. It went through immediately, approving a charge of $3,247 without any verification needed. No PIN, no signature, no questions asked. The receipt printed out normally, but when I looked at the merchant copy, instead of the usual credit card number, there was just a string of zeros and ones, binary code. I completed the transaction mechanically, my mind reeling with questions. The other diners were leaving, casting final glances at the poor waitress who had provided them with such entertainment. They had no idea they had just witnessed something far more complex than simple rich person cruelty. 20 minutes later, after finishing my side work and clocking out, I found Marcus waiting for me in the alley behind the restaurant. He was leaning against a black Tesla, no longer the arrogant billionaire from inside. His shoulders were slumped, his confident demeanor replaced by something that looked almost like remorse. "Sarah," he said as I approached, and hearing my name from his lips sent chills down my spine. "I know you have questions. I know tonight was ... He paused, searching for words. "I know I hurt you, but it was necessary. Necessary." I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice anymore. Humiliating me in front of 50 people was necessary. Making me crawl for money was necessary. "What kind of sick game are you playing?" He pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. It was displaying a live feed from inside the restaurant, focused on the table where his friends were still sitting. They were deep in conversation, apparently unaware they were being monitored. "They needed to believe you were broken," he explained. "They needed to see you as completely harmless, beneath their notice. Because what you recorded tonight, that conversation about the Medicore stock, about the drug trials, that information is worth more than you can imagine." I stared at him, pieces of a puzzle I didn't understand slowly clicking into place. "You knew I was recording." "I made sure you were recording," he admitted. "The voice recorder app on your phone was activated remotely. Every word of their conversation has been captured in crystal clear quality. Richard Thorne and his associates just confessed to securities fraud, insider trading, and conspiracy to endanger public health. They did it because they thought you were just a poor, defeated waitress who couldn't possibly pose a threat to them. My mind was spinning. But why? Why would you want them recorded? They're your friends. Marcus's laugh was bitter. They're not my friends, Sarah. They're criminals who have been using my reputation and resources to legitimize their schemes. Tonight was about gathering evidence to bring them down. But I needed someone they would never suspect. Someone they would completely ignore. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Someone exactly like you. The photograph, I whispered, remembering what I'd seen in his wallet. In your wallet, there's a photograph of someone who looks exactly like me. His face went pale. You saw that. Who is she? Marcus. Who is that girl? And why do we look identical? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ground. When he finally looked up, his eyes were filled with something I hadn't seen before. Pain. Deep, profound pain. Her name was Emma, he said, quietly, and she was my sister. The word hit me like a physical blow. Sister, past tense, she died 3 years ago, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Killed by a drug that Medicorp rushed to market without proper testing. The same kind of cover-up Richard was talking about tonight. Emma was part of the clinical trial, and when she started showing severe side effects, they buried the reports and released the drug anyway. She was 25 years old. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. That's why you wanted them recorded. This isn't about justice, it's about revenge. It started as revenge, he admitted. But then I found you, and everything changed. Do you know what the odds are of finding someone who looks exactly like my dead sister? Do you know what it felt like the first time I saw you working in that restaurant? I was beginning to understand, and the realization terrified me. You've been watching me. For 6 months, he confirmed. Learning your routines, your financial situation, your vulnerabilities. I needed you desperate enough to endure what happened tonight, but strong enough to see it through. I needed you to be the perfect witness, but there was something else, something he wasn't telling me. Something about that credit card with my name on it. Something about the way he looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. The truth was bigger than revenge, bigger than justice. And I was about to discover just how deep this rabbit hole went. There's more, isn't there? I asked, my voice barely steady. The credit card, the way you've been watching me. This isn't just about using me as a witness. What aren't you telling me? Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that made him look younger, more vulnerable. The night Emma died, she made me promise something. She was in the hospital, dying from complications that Medicorp knew were possible but never disclosed. She grabbed my hand and made me swear that if anything happened to her, I would find a way to make them pay. Not just financially, personally. He pulled out his wallet and showed me the photograph again. Now that I was seeing it clearly, the resemblance was even more striking. It was like looking at myself, but softer somehow, more innocent. Emma was going to expose them, he continued. She had documented everything, the side effects they ignored, the reports they buried, the patients they sacrificed for profit, but she died before she could go public. So you found me to take her place, I said, understanding flooding through me. Someone who looked like her, someone desperate enough to do what you needed. It started that way, he admitted. But Sarah, what I discovered about you, it changes everything. He pulled out a manila folder from his car and handed it to me. Open it. With trembling hands, I opened the folder. Inside were documents, birth certificates, adoption records, DNA test, results. My eyes scanned the pages, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then I found it buried in a genetics report that made my blood run cold. According to the DNA analysis, Emma Blackstone and I shared 99.7% genetic similarity. Not just a resemblance, we were essentially identical twins. But that was impossible. I had been adopted as a baby, with no information about my birth family. How is this possible? I whispered. Emma was adopted too, Marcus said quietly. My parents couldn't have children naturally, so they adopted her when she was 6 months old. They never told her, never told me. I only found out after she died. When I was going through her personal effects, I found her adoption papers, and I started investigating. I was staring at the documents, my entire understanding of my identity crumbling. Are you saying we're sisters? That Emma was my twin, biological twins, separated at birth and adopted by different families, he confirmed. Emma grew up with wealth and privilege. You grew up in foster care, struggling to survive. It's like some cosmic joke, identical genetics, completely different lives. The implications were staggering. The sister I never knew I had was dead, killed by the same people who were now sitting in that restaurant, planning their next scheme. And Marcus had been using my grief and desperation, using my resemblance to his dead adoptive sister, to get his revenge. You manipulated me, I said, anger rising in my voice. You let me live in poverty, work myself to exhaustion, endure humiliation, all so I could be your perfect weapon against them. Yes, he admitted, without trying to justify it. I did, but Sarah, what we accomplished tonight, the evidence we gathered, it's going to bring down the entire network, not just Richard and Medicore, but dozens of other companies involved in similar co-ops. Emma's death is going to save thousands of lives. I looked at the credit card again, the one with my name etched into its transparent surface. What is this? That's Emma's inheritance, he said. $50 million, sitting in an account that's been waiting for the right person to claim it. According to the DNA evidence, you're her biological twin. Legally, you're entitled to everything she left behind. $50 million. More money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But it came with a price. The knowledge that I had a sister who died before I ever knew she existed, and that her adoptive brother had manipulated me into becoming his instrument of revenge. There's one more thing, Marcus said, his voice barely audible. The recording you made tonight, it's not just evidence, it's a dead man's switch. If anything happens to either of us in the next 48 hours, that recording automatically gets sent to the FBI, the SEC, and every major news organization in the country. We're protected, but only if we see this through to the end. I stared at him, trying to process everything I'd learned. My entire life had been a lie. The sister I never knew was dead. The man who had humiliated me was actually ... what? My ally, my brother-in-law, my enemy. But as I stood there in that alley, holding $50 million worth of plastic and a folder full of life-changing revelations, I realized something that terrified me more than anything else. Despite everything Marcus had done, despite the manipulation and the lies, I was starting to understand him. And worse than that, I was starting to trust him. Because what came next was going to require us to work together. And the stakes were higher than either of us had imagined. Part 7. I need time to process this, I said, clutching the folder and the mysterious credit card. This is too much. My sister, the money, the revenge plot. I can't think straight. Marcus nodded, but there was urgency in his eyes. I understand, but Sarah, we don't have much time. Richard and his associates are planning to execute their Medicore trade first thing Monday morning. Once they do, the evidence becomes worthless. They'll have already profited from their insider information. So, what are you asking me to do? Help me finish what Emma started, he said. We have everything we need to destroy them. The recording, the financial evidence, the documentation of their but I need you to be the one who presents it. You're the perfect witness, credible, sympathetic, someone who was hurt by their actions. The FBI will believe you in ways they'd never believe me. I looked at this man who had orchestrated my humiliation, who had revealed himself to be connected to me in ways I was still struggling to understand. And what happens to us after? What happens when this is all over? That's up to you, he said simply. The money is yours regardless. Emma's inheritance, plus interest, plus the profits from some investments I made in her name. You never have to work another day in your life if you don't want to. You can disappear, start over somewhere else, forget this ever happened. And you, he was quiet for a moment. I'll probably go to prison, he admitted. What I did tonight, the manipulation, the surveillance, using you without your consent, it's not legal, even if the cause was just. But Emma will finally have justice, and maybe that's enough. I studied his face in the dim light from the street lamp. There was something else there, something he wasn't saying. You feel guilty about her death. I should have protected her, he said, his voice breaking slightly. She was my little sister, adopted or not. When she started getting sick from that drug trial, I should have pulled her out immediately. I should have used my resources, my connections, anything to save her. Instead, I trusted the medical professionals, believed them when they said the side effects were temporary. You couldn't have known. But I could have tried harder. And now the only sister I had is dead, and the only sister you had is dead. and we're both standing in an alley plotting revenge like this is going to bring her back. Tears were streaming down his face now, the composed billionaire facade completely gone. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than anger. Toward Marcus, I felt pity. We were both victims in our own ways, both mourning a sister we'd never really known, both trying to find meaning in loss that made no sense. "Show me everything," I said finally. "All of it. The evidence. The plan. What happens next. If I'm going to do this, I need to understand exactly what we're up against." Marcus wiped his eyes and opened his car door. "Get in. There's something you need to see." We drove in silence through the empty Manhattan streets, ending up at a nondescript office building in Midtown. Marcus used a keycard to get us inside, leading me to an elevator that required another special card to operate. We went up to the 42nd floor, where the elevator opened directly into what looked like a high-tech command center. There were dozens of monitors showing financial data, news feeds, and what appeared to be surveillance footage from various locations. In the center of the room was a massive conference table covered with documents, photographs, and charts that looked like something from a crime thriller. "This is Emma's war room," Marcus explained. "Everything she discovered about Medicor and their network of corruption. I've been building on her work for 3 years, tracking their operations, documenting their crimes, waiting for the right moment to strike." I walked around the room, taking in the scope of what Emma had uncovered. It wasn't just one pharmaceutical company, it was an entire network of corporations, regulatory officials, and politicians all working together to prioritize profits over human lives. The scale was breathtaking and terrifying. "How many people have died because of them?" I asked. "Thousands," Marcus replied grimly. "Emma was just one victim in a system that treats human lives as acceptable losses for quarterly earnings. But Sarah, what we did tonight, what you did tonight, it's going to bring down the entire network." I stopped at a wall covered with photographs of victims, people who had died or been permanently disabled by drugs that should never have made it to market. Men, women, children, elderly people, all casualties in a war they didn't even know they were fighting. And there, in the center of it all, was Emma's photograph. But this time, I was looking at her not as a stranger who resembled me, but as my sister. My twin sister, who had died fighting a battle I never knew existed. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. Not for the money, not for Marcus, but for Emma, for the sister I never got to know, who had died trying to protect people like me from predators like Richard Thorne. "What do we do first?" I asked. But as Marcus smiled for the first time that night, neither of us realized that we were being watched, that our every move was being monitored by the very people we were plotting to destroy. And that by tomorrow morning, our entire plan would be in jeopardy. Marcus pulled up a chair next to one of the computer terminals and began typing rapidly. "First, we need to make sure the recording is properly secured and duplicated. The FBI will want the original file, but we need backups in case something goes wrong." As he worked, I continued exploring Emma's research. The depth of her investigation was incredible. She had traced connections between Medicor and at least 15 other companies, all engaged in similar practices. She had documented bribes to FDA officials, falsified clinical trial data, and evidence of intimidation tactics used against whistleblowers. "She was brilliant," I said, reading through her notes. "How did she uncover all of this?" "Emma was an investigative journalist before she got sick," Marcus explained without looking up from his keyboard. "She specialized in corporate malfeasance. When she volunteered for the Medicor trial, she thought she was helping advance medical science. When she started experiencing side effects, she began investigating. That's when she discovered she wasn't helping humanity. She was being used as a test subject for a drug they already knew was dangerous." I found a folder labeled Personal and opened it hesitantly. Inside were Emma's personal documents, including a journal she had kept during her illness. I started reading, and my heart broke with every entry. Day 15. "The headaches are getting worse." When I mentioned it to Dr. Richardson, he assured me this was normal. But I've been researching the drug compound, and I'm finding reports of similar symptoms in animal trials that were never published. Day 23. I confronted Richardson about the unpublished studies. He got defensive and suggested I was experiencing anxiety, not physical symptoms, but I know my own body. Something is very wrong. Day 31. I've been secretly documenting everything. If something happens to me, I want there to be a record. Marcus doesn't know how sick I really am. I don't want him to worry. Tears were streaming down my face as I read my sister's final thoughts. She had known she was dying, and she had spent her last weeks gathering evidence to prevent others from suffering the same fate. Marcus, I said softly. She knew she was going to die. He stopped typing and turned to look at me. She never let on. Right up until the end, she was telling me she was getting better, that the side effects were manageable. I had no idea she was documenting everything. I kept reading. The final entry was dated just 2 days before Emma's death. If someone is reading this, it means the drug killed me, and Marcus found my research. I hope he's smart enough not to try to get revenge through violence. That's not what I want, but I do want justice. These people need to be stopped before they kill more innocent people. I've left detailed instructions in my safe deposit box. Everything Marcus needs to expose them legally is there. I just pray he finds the strength to see it through. She left you instructions, I said, showing him the journal entry. Did you find them? Marcus's face went pale. Safe deposit box. I went through all her belongings after she died. I never found any mention of a safe deposit box. We stared at each other as the implications sank in. There was more evidence, potentially devastating evidence, that we hadn't even discovered yet. Emma had been more thorough than either of us realized. We need to find that box, I said. Agreed. But first we need to get the recording to the FBI. The longer we wait, the more risk there is that Richard and his associates will discover what we've done. Marcus finished uploading the audio file to a secure server and turned to face me. Sarah, once we make this move, there's no going back. These people have unlimited resources and no moral boundaries. They've killed to protect their secrets before, and they won't hesitate to do it again. I understand, I said, though I'm not sure I really did. The magnitude of what we were about to attempt was starting to sink in. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Agent Morrison. This is Marcus Blackstone. I have information about a massive securities fraud and conspiracy that you need to see immediately. Yes, I know what time it is. Trust me, this can't wait until morning. As he spoke to the FBI agent, I found myself thinking about Emma's journal, about her final words asking Marcus not to seek violent revenge. She had wanted justice, not vengeance. But looking around this room, at the scope of the conspiracy she had uncovered, I wondered if there was really any difference. They're sending someone over now, Marcus said, hanging up the phone. Agent Morrison is bringing a full forensics team. They want to secure all the evidence before word gets out that we have it. How long do we have? Maybe 2 hours before the FBI arrives. After that, everything changes. The investigation becomes official, and we become protected witnesses, but also targets. I looked at the credit card again, still struggling to believe. It was real. Emma's inheritance. Is it really $50 million? $53 million, as of yesterday's closing, Marcus confirmed. She was incredibly smart with investments. She put most of her money into companies that were doing legitimate medical research, trying to balance out the damage being done by places like Medicorp. The irony was overwhelming. My sister had died fighting against corporate corruption, and her death had made me rich enough to never work again. But money felt meaningless when I thought about all the lives that could have been saved if Emma had lived to publish her investigation. There's something else, Marcus said hesitantly. Something I haven't told you about Emma's final days. I looked up from the journal, dreading what I might hear next. She asked about you, he said quietly. In the hospital, during one of her last lucid moments, she said she'd been having dreams about a sister she'd never met. Someone who looked exactly like her. The doctors said it was hallucinations from the drugs, but now I wonder, ... You think she somehow knew about me? Twins are supposed to have a connection, right? Even separated twins sometimes sense each other's presence. Maybe Emma knew she had a sister out there somewhere. Maybe that's why she fought so hard to document everything, because she knew someone would continue her work. The idea that Emma had somehow sensed my existence, that she had been thinking about me as she died, was almost too much to bear, but it also gave me strength. I wasn't just seeking justice for a stranger anymore. I was finishing the work my sister had started. Agent Morrison will be here soon, Marcus said, checking his watch. Before they arrive, there's one more thing we need to discuss. After tonight, our lives are going to change forever. Are you ready for that? I thought about my cramped studio apartment, my exhausting job, my life of financial desperation. Then I thought about Emma, dying alone while fighting to save lives. The choice was obvious. I'm ready, I said. Let's finish what Emma started. But neither of us was prepared for what Agent Morrison would tell us when she arrived. The conspiracy was even bigger than Emma had discovered, and the danger we were walking into was far greater than we had imagined. Agent Morrison arrived exactly 2 hours later with a team of federal investigators that transformed Emma's war room into an official crime scene. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who immediately took control of the situation with military precision. "Mr. Blackstone," she said after reviewing the audio recording and Emma's documentation, "what you've uncovered here is the largest pharmaceutical fraud case in FBI history. But I need you to understand something. You and Ms. Matthews are now in extreme danger." "We expected that," Marcus replied, but Agent Morrison shook her head. "No, you don't understand. While you were gathering this evidence, Richard Thorne's security team was monitoring your activities. They know what you recorded tonight, and they know about this location. We intercepted communications indicating they're planning to eliminate both of you within the next 12 hours. My blood ran cold. Eliminate us. 3 witnesses who tried to expose Medicorp in the past died in accidents within weeks of coming forward," Agent Morrison explained grimly. "Car crashes, apparent suicides, a random mugging gone wrong. We could never prove it was connected, but the pattern was clear. These people don't just destroy careers, they destroy lives." Marcus grabbed my hand instinctively. "What are options?" "We're placing both of you in protective custody immediately," Agent Morrison said. "But first, we need to locate Emma's safe deposit box. If she documented additional evidence, we need it secured before Thorne's people find it." Using Emma's personal documents, we traced the safe deposit box to a bank in Connecticut. What we found there exceeded our wildest expectations. Emma hadn't just documented Medicorp's crimes. She had uncovered a network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of government, involving senators, FDA administrators, and even Supreme Court justices. "This isn't just corporate fraud," Agent Morrison whispered as she reviewed Emma's files. "This is a conspiracy that could bring down the entire regulatory system." But Emma had saved the most devastating evidence for last. Hidden in the bottom of the safe deposit box was a video recording she had made just days before her death. In it, she revealed that Richard Thorne had personally visited her in the hospital, offering her $50 million to destroy her research and keep quiet about Medicorp's cover-up. "I'm making this recording as insurance," Emma said on the video, looking pale but determined. "If something happens to me, if I die from this drug, I want everyone to know that Richard Thorne knew exactly what would happen. He looked me in the eye and chose money over my life." Watching my sister's final testimony was heartbreaking, but it was also the evidence we needed to ensure convictions. With Emma's video, the audio recording from the restaurant, and the massive document trail she had compiled, the case against Medicorp and their co-conspirators was airtight. The trial that followed became known as the Medicorp massacre in the media. Richard Thorne and 14 co-conspirators were convicted on multiple federal charges and sentenced to a combined 847 years in prison. The pharmaceutical company was dissolved, and over $2 billion in fines and settlements were distributed to victims' families. Marcus served 8 months in minimum security prison for his surveillance activities, but he was granted early release for his cooperation with the investigation. The judge acknowledged that while his methods were illegal, his motivations were understandable given the scope of the conspiracy. As for me, I discovered that inheriting $53 million was just the beginning. Emma's investments had been carefully chosen to support ethical medical research, and managing her portfolio connected me with scientists and doctors who were working to prevent exactly the kind of tragedies that had claimed her life. I left my job at the restaurant, obviously, but I didn't disappear into a life of leisure as Marcus had suggested. Instead, I established the Emma Blackstone Foundation for Medical Ethics, using my sister's inheritance to fund independent drug safety research and support whistleblowers in the pharmaceutical industry. The foundation's first major success came 18 months after the trial, when our researchers identified safety issues with a new arthritis medication before it reached the market. The drug company voluntarily withdrew their application after reviewing our findings, potentially saving thousands of lives. Marcus and I developed an unlikely partnership. He provided the business expertise and connections, while I handled the foundation's day-to-day operations and victim advocacy work. We weren't friends exactly. Too much had happened between us for that. But we shared a mission that transcended our complicated history. 3 years after that horrible night at the restaurant, I received a letter that changed everything once again. It was from a woman named Dr. Patricia Chen, a geneticist who had been following the Medicore case and had read about my connection to Emma. Dear Ms. Matthews, the letter began. I believe you and Emma Blackstone were part of a larger medical experiment that you were never told about. I have information that you need to see. Dr. Chen's research revealed that Emma and I weren't just twins, separated at birth. We were part of an illegal genetic study conducted in the 1990s. 24 sets of identical twins had been deliberately separated and placed with families of different socioeconomic backgrounds to study the effects of environment on genetic expression. The study was funded by pharmaceutical companies, including Medicore, who wanted to understand how genetics and environment affected drug responses. We were test subjects from birth, monitored throughout our lives without our knowledge or consent. Emma's participation in the drug trial wasn't random, Dr. Chen explained when we met. She was specifically recruited because of her genetic profile. They knew exactly how she would respond to the experimental drug, and they used her anyway. The revelation was staggering. Emma hadn't just been killed by corporate greed. She had been murdered by the same people who had been experimenting on us our entire lives. We were lab rats who had never known we were in a cage. But Dr. Chen's research also revealed something else. Of the 24 sets of twins in the study, Emma and I were the only ones who had survived to adulthood. The others had died from various causes, some from medical experiments, others from suspicious accidents, and several from suicides. We weren't just victims of pharmaceutical fraud. We were the sole survivors of a decades-long human experimentation program that made the Medicore conspiracy look small by comparison. Asterisk, 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 E. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The final revelation came when Dr. Chen showed me the last piece of evidence, a recorded conversation between Medicore executives discussing the twin study results. In it, Richard Thorne's voice was clearly audible. The Matthews twin is showing remarkable resilience despite her impoverished upbringing. If we can break her psychologically, we'll have complete data on how environmental stress affects genetic expression in this particular genotype. Arrange for her to be monitored more closely. They had been watching me my entire life, orchestrating my struggles, ensuring that I remained poor and desperate so they could study my responses to chronic stress. Every hardship I had endured, every financial crisis I had survived, every moment of despair I had felt, it had all been engineered by them, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated the very resilience they were studying. Instead of breaking me, their experiments had made me stronger, and when they finally gave me the tools to fight back, through Marcus's manipulation and Emma's evidence, I had used their own weapons against them. The expanded investigation that followed, Dr. Chen's revelations uncovered an international network of illegal human experimentation that spanned multiple countries and involved dozens of major corporations. The legal proceedings continued for 5 more years, resulting in the largest settlement in medical ethics history. Today, the Emma Blackstone Foundation has prevented 17 dangerous drugs from reaching the market and has provided support to over 3,000 victims of pharmaceutical fraud. Marcus eventually became the foundation's co-director, and despite everything that happened between us, I've come to understand that we're both survivors of the same system that killed our sister. I think about Emma every day. I never got to meet her, never got to know her as a person, but her courage and determination shaped the trajectory of my entire life. She died believing that justice was possible, and her faith wasn't misplaced. Sometimes I wonder what our lives would have been like if we had grown up together, if we had been allowed to be sisters instead of test subjects. But then I remember all the lives we've saved through the foundation, all the families who didn't have to endure what we endured, and I know that Emma's sacrifice wasn't meaningless. The billionaire who laughed at my clothes that night thought he was humiliating a helpless waitress. What he actually did was set in motion a chain of events that would expose one of the largest criminal conspiracies in modern history. He gave me the tools to honor my sister's memory and ensure that her death had meaning, and that transparent credit card with my name on it, I still carry it, not because I need the money, but because it reminds me that Emma never forgot about the sister she never got to meet. Even in death, she found a way to give me the resources I needed to continue her fight. Justice isn't always pretty, and it doesn't always come through conventional means. Sometimes it requires manipulation, sacrifice, and people willing to risk everything for the truth. But when it finally arrives, when the powerful are held accountable for their crimes, it's worth every moment of pain it took to achieve it. Emma would be proud of what we accomplished. And maybe, somewhere, she finally found the peace she was searching for when she started this fight. Her legacy lives on in every life saved, every drug pulled from the market, every whistleblower who finds the courage to speak truth to power. The girl who looked exactly like me in that photograph wasn't just my sister, she was my inspiration, my guide, and ultimately, my salvation. And that's a bond that not even death can break.